Welcome and thank you for coming again. It's a really special pleasure to have Ben Okri here today. It's a very rare appearance in New York, and it's been a long time since he's been here. You said you were last here in 93 or 94, was it?
It was a while.
And you said you took the boat that time, right?
I took the boat.
QE2.
I hate flying.
And this trip was almost postponed by the volcano eruptions, but
we braved it.
You made it okay. Ben Okri was born in Minna, Nigeria, not Lagos, as I found out, as it says in one of his books. Did you ever live in Lagos, or how do you think that came?
Well, I think it's because most of my writing is about Lagos. And I'm steeped in Lagos.
Ben was a child during the Nigerian Civil War, the Biafran War. You were in Nigeria. Later went to England to attend university, ultimately settling in London. Ben is a poet, novelist, and essayist, but more than that, too. He's a conjurer, a dreamer, a diviner. I'd almost say a healer if it didn't sound too new agey. Above all else, he's a believer in the power of the imagination and storytelling to make a profound difference. He has published works of poetry and essays, 2 collections of short stories, Incidents of the Shrine and Stars of the New Curfew, which I believe has just been reissued by Vintage Books. It is his trilogy of novels, however, the 1991 Booker Prize-winning Famished Road, followed by Songs of Enchantment and Infinite Riches, that are widely considered the towering achievement of his early career. Great, big, masterful, nightmarish novels that follow Azaro, a spirit child, on his adventures through a violent and harrowing African underworld or otherworld. More recently, in works like Starbook and Tales of Freedom, which haven't been published in the US yet, I believe, Okri has created something of a hybrid form, merging elements of fiction, fable, and fairy tale, enigmatic dreamscapes where Okri's vision has been stripped down and distilled to its essence. The air is still ominous and threatening. War, suffering, and oppression are ever present, but the stories have taken on a universal, archetypal cast. In Tales of Freedom, he also includes several examples of what he calls stokus, a mixed breed of story and haiku. He has also lately been experimenting with a combination of poetry and essays, poetic essays, as he calls them. It's a great joy for me to be here today with Okri to discuss the evolution of his work, his long and fruitful journey as a writer and creative artist. We'll begin with a reading by Okri, some poetry, followed by a conversation, and then another reading of a stoku, and then we'll open it up for audience questions and end up with a poem. So Ben Okri will now read, and then we'll have a signing afterwards outside. We'll now read some poetry.
If they want it.
If you want it.
Thank you, Tepper Anderson, for a very thoughtful and comprehensive introduction. Before I read, I also want to say how pleased I am that you're here, and how particularly pleased I am to be here. As you heard, I'm not a big fan of flying. Wherever I go by train or by boat, or I swim. This is really unusual for me. So I also want to take the opportunity to thank PEN USA, my good friends Salman Rushdie and Anthony Appiah and Carol Llewellyn for her extraordinary efforts in making all this happen. And to you all for bringing your ears. I hope you've brought more than 2 ears. I usually require 3. But as I get older, I think 4 is better, but 3 will be okay tonight. I'll read some poems, and we'll take it from there. Last couple of months, last 9 months in fact, I've done something I've always wanted to do, which is devote myself to writing poems. The thing about writing novels is that you never get time to write poems the way you want to write them. A novel is a big, selfish beast, basically. It doesn't let you do anything else. So this is for poetry. First poem I'm going to read is called The World is Rich. They tell me that the world is rich with terror. I say the world is rich with love unfound. It's inside us and all around. Terror is there, no doubt. Violence, hunger, and drought. Rivers that no longer flow to the sea. It's the shadow of humanity. There's terror in the air, and we have put it there. We have made God into an enemy, have made God into a weapon, a poverty, a blindness, an army. But the world is rich with great love unfound. Even in the terror, there is love twisted round and round. Set it free. River, flow to the sea. Second piece I'm going to read is not really a poem. It's a minor provocation. Royal Society of Literature asked about 10 writers to suggest 10 seminal books that they believe that everybody under the age of 20 should read. And some of my fellow writers suggested books like Moby Dick, Ulysses, Crime and Punishment. And I couldn't come up with 10 books. It was an impossible task, so I came up with this instead. It's called 10.5 Inclinations. 1. There is a secret trail of books meant to inspire and enlighten you. Find that trail. 2. Read outside your nation, color, class, gender. 3. Read the books your parents hate. 4. Read the books your parents love. 5. Have 1 or 2 authors that are important, that speak to you, and make their works your secret passion. 6. Read widely for fun, for stimulation, for escape. 7. Don't read what everyone else is reading. Check them out later, cautiously. 8. Read what you're not supposed to read. 9. Read for your own liberation and mental freedom. 10. Books are like mirrors. Don't just read the words. Go into the mirror. That's where the real secrets are. Inside, behind. That's where the gods dream, where our realities are born. 10.5. Read the world. Read the world. It is the most mysterious book of all. Next poem I'm going to read is a poem called Migrations. Because in all the countries around the world, in Europe, in the Western world, this problem of migration exercises us profoundly. Whether it's in France or America or Germany or England, everywhere you go in the Western world. So I thought I'd write this. Migrations. The world is a cauldron in which we are mixed. Time is an illusion. No condition is fixed. And so in our millions we swim or walk or break across boundaries, fleeing wars, evils, and hunger to make a new home in what seems a void, an empty space, without our histories or tales of our race. But about us scream the inhabitants who have never known barren lands or tyranny or such pain that pushes us from the warren of cruel histories into lands whose earth may not receive us. But we are like pollen. We are fertile, and we grieve. I'll read a final one for this stretch. This one's called Lessons from a Master, Extracts. I went to an extraordinary exhibition in England of Pablo Picasso's ceramics. And I was so struck, not by what I saw, but by what they made me think of, that I wrote this poem. It's a prose poem. Lessons from a Master. Be influenced by new materials. Multiply your language. Let the materials speak. Impose a form or follow the flow. Transcend morality. Don't be your censor. There is no destiny or destination in art. Be open to conducive environments. Always give the child something to do. Form follows vision. Humor is the relaxation of the anxious intelligence. To have no purpose in art can be conducive to creativity. To refresh is as important as to instruct. Keep your artistic libido alive. Follow the sunlight of your creativity. Art is joy in the river, time rewarded. Thank you.
You were telling me the other day when we met that for you, writing starts with a poem, and then you kind of see which way it takes you, whether it wants to become an essay or a novel, the seeds of a novel or a short story. Tell me more about the creative process, how you know what you want to write.
Well, I think the primary impulse is akin to the first feelings you get when you have something like a cold coming on, except that it's more metaphysical, it's more displaced. What I'm trying to say is that the first feelings is almost like a breach, a disturbance in the spirit. That's why I say it's poetic. I know so many artists, so many writers who say they have an impulse, but what that impulse becomes is unpredictable. For me, that impulse is primarily poetic. It's a sound, it's a beat, it's a mood, particularly a mood. Mm-hmm. It's never a dream, but it's a mood that contains within it the mystery of a dream, the displacement of traveling.
So the themes are embedded in the mood.
Everything is embedded in it, as a tree is embedded in the seed. But the thing is, how does it become one thing rather than another? Right. I think what happens is you brood on that mood. You incubate it. Every idea tends towards its true nature if you let it. I used to have a great friend in Nigeria who he'd have an idea for a novel, and he'd write a poem. Or he'd have an idea for a poem, and he'd write a novel. And I'd say to him, "You told me this was going to be a poem. It's become a novel." And I'm fascinated by that.
Have you had that happen?
Very rarely, because I take longer to listen. I wait. I'm a big waiter. I wait. I don't wait at tables.
I'm interested in your whole span of your career. I mean, you told me that you wrote your first novel when you were a teenager, and your first published novel was you were 21. I mean, were you starting out more as a novelist at that time? And has it changed over the years? I mean, now are you more prone to write poetry?
I think one's beginnings in, as an artist is always unintentional. In my early teens, when I was 14, 15, I wrote a novel that was set in China. I'd never been to China before. I don't know why I did that. It seemed to me to be a natural thing to do.
Do you still have it?
I lost it. Yeah. I lost it. So one day I'm going to recreate that. But the point I'm trying to make is that you start doing what you're supposed to be doing before you know that you're doing it. And I only came to consciously writing when I was about 17, 18. And I began by poetry, like I said. I wrote 100 poems in about 3 months, reread them, thought they were all terrible, burnt 95 of them and kept 5. And it's in the process of destroying 95 poems that I actually began to discover something of my voice. So for me, creativity is always bound up with destruction. We don't like to say that so much these days, but it is. If you're strong enough to destroy, you're strong enough to create. This is not an ethical thing. I'm not advocating we go do this to people just in terms of the work. We tend to be too precious about our dreams. And the first courage for me comes from within, being able to say, that you have to die, this you have to go.
In several of your books, we were talking about this. You thank your parents for inspiring you, and you were telling me that your mother was a storyteller, and your father took you to England when you were young. But in any case, did they encourage you to write? And what was it? I mean, in Nigeria, were you inspired to write, or was it more when you came to England that you started a writing career, or thinking as a writer?
I think one thing people don't know about Africa, certainly about Nigeria, is that it's a great storytelling culture.
Well, there's a great literary tradition.
And a great literary tradition, but preceding the literary tradition is a storytelling tradition. And by that I mean that it's impossible to grow up in Nigeria without being told about the world, whether it's trees, the sky, rivers, without being told about the world through stories. It's stories that introduces the world to you. So in a sense, you grow up with a mythologized universe. And that might take the form of traditional myths, it may take the form of fairy tales, it may take the form of the kind of tales that our mothers tell us.
And that's what you've done with your writing, is combine a lot of these forms.
But not at first. I didn't see it at first. It takes a long time to see what is natural to you. It's only after I'd made a long journey into the Western tradition of naturalism and got exhausted with that and a little bored with it, to be honest, because I came to an astonishing discovery that the naturalism of whether you call it Tolstoy or Balzac or Dickens, and I love them greatly, don't misunderstand me, but that this naturalism did not speak about certain aspects of the world I grew up in. And what am I trying to say here? Naturalism only speaks about the world that you can see. and implies that everything that happens to us as human beings has a cause and an effect that is visible. But the tradition I grew up in also has that element that part of the world that you see, the most important part of it is the world that you don't see. And that's not a naturalism. So if you're going to tell a story about the part of the world I come from, you have to break the box, basically. Did that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. But, I mean, there's the Nigerian tradition also. I mean, Amos Tutuola and other writers.
Yes.
Were you influenced by those writers as well?
Well, Tutuola was very, very important for me because he was lucky enough not to have gone through the mental limitation of naturalism. He didn't go through that. In fact, he cites his earliest influences as being a movie of the Arabian Nights. Not the Arabian Nights itself, the book, but a movie, an early movie of the Arabian Nights.
That he saw where?
It turned up in Nigeria somewhere. These things do, you know.
Well, tell me about conceiving the trilogy, Famished Road, the three books, and tell me about that, what you wanted to write and the idea for those, and also the kind of the label of magical realism, or that was in the comparisons.
Shall I destroy the label first before we? Well,
I'm curious to hear what you have to say.
Well, what I say is, if you haven't seen a horse before, you'll call a camel a horse, and vice versa. Do you get what I'm saying? So anything that you haven't seen before, anything else that you haven't seen before, you put them into the same category. And much as I love the greatest works of magical realism, what I do is not magical realism. I could go on for a long time about this. But the primary difference is this. Magical realism is partly filtered through surrealism and symbolism, which is a great French tradition. And most of the great magical realists actually studied in France and lived in France. It's very important to stress that. The second thing is, what I'm trying to do within the African tradition, is actually to tell stories about the world in which all the dimensions of reality, visible and invisible, have their natural place. And I'm not doing this because of a poetic inflation. I'm doing it because it is natural to the people's way of seeing. It's as simple as that. I grew up with kids who would refer to an empty space and say, oh, my grandmother is here. Now, if you're going to tell a story like that, in the Western naturalistic tradition, that's a ghost story. But if you tell it within the form that it ought to be told in, it's not a ghost story. It's just simply a story, part of the normal, natural way in which people see the world. And I distill this in a simple sentence. I say that every worldview is superstitious. Maybe I should say that again. Every worldview is superstitious. In other words, everybody sees the world from how they've been taught to see the world, from the traditions they've inherited, whether they're philosophical, the religious, the cultural. Everyone's worldview is made up of what they've been told, what they've imbibed from their society. And so the French worldview is different from the German, it's different from the Eskimo, it's different from the African. That's why I say every worldview is superstitious. We don't share the same reality. This might sound like strange news, but we simply do not. No two people share the same reality, because everyone's reality is an internal one transposed onto the external world. We see the world from inside of ourselves. We cannot prove any absolute external reality for every person on this planet. And I think the basis of this is what gives rise to a lot of cultural antagonism in the world, basically. You're looking puzzled.
No, I'm still following you, and I'm trying to think of the span of your career after the trilogy. And as you start thinking about merging different forms. So tell me more about your ideas of experimenting and creating these hokus and poetic essays.
The thing is, I don't really think of them as experiments.
Okay.
What I'm most fascinated by is trying to express as simply as possible all the different dimensions of reality, all the different dimensions that make us human. And I feel that too many of our art forms limit us. They tell us to look at the world only like this, when in fact the world is capable of being looked at like that, or even like that, or even diagonally like that. And I find my greatest inspiration in this in the great early 20th century artists. So for me, walking through the 5th floor at MoMA is like being at home. Because you have all these artists who reconfigure the world in accordance with the primary law of the imagination. It's free in art, but it's not free in literature. Literature is the most conservative medium in the whole art family. More conservative than dance, more conservative than music, more conservative than painting. Maybe not as conservative as film. Film is pretty conservative too. But the literature, and especially the novel, is profoundly conservative. And that's great on one side, and it's bad on the other side. It's great because it's very reassuring. It gives us familiarity. But on the other side, it turns us into children, always wanting the same thing, always expecting the world to be reflected back to us in the same way. So it doesn't challenge our minds. It doesn't expand our thinking. And I think the primary job of the artist is really the magnification of internal freedom. If they're not doing that, I think they should be sent back home.
Has it been difficult to, with publishers and editors and critics for them to understand, or do you find yourself pigeonholed? Or
it is difficult. Every attempt to ask questions about the relationship between the forms in which we express ourselves and the world that is reflected, every attempt to do that is problematic with critics. Because in a way, critics are the guardians of orthodoxy. That's their job. A critic reads the book, your book here, and then turns to the rest of the world and say, well, this book is the kind of book that you're used to reading, and this is the kind of book that you will enjoy. That's primarily their job. They've got two jobs. The popular critic, that's their job. You'll love this because you're used to this. Or you're not going to like this because you're just not going to like this. Their job is to... But the higher critic has a higher job, a greater job. The greater critic, the kind of critic that T.S. Eliot was talking about, for example, their job actually is to also add to the amplification of individual freedom. It was critics that actually made us appreciate the great works of the Western canon, like the Odyssey, the Aeneid. I can't think of one great work, even Moby Dick. Moby Dick was silent for almost 75 years. It took 3 generations down the line to actually look at Moby Dick and say, hey, this is a great book. But in its time, it was unread and unappreciated for exactly the same reason. So we need an avant-garde of criticism, basically.
Tell me about your interest in the haiku and the haiku form. I mean, have you written poetry as well?
Well, the latest...
Or how you came about...
The latest thing that's been published that I've been dealing with is this bringing together of the short story and poetry. And it seems like a pointless thing to do, but there's method in my insanity, I promise you. And it's that I've always felt that the short story is a very fluid form. What is a short story? Is it 2 pages? Is it 50 pages? Is Heart of Darkness a short story? Or is it a novella? People can't decide what the length of a short story is, or even what its form is. So being someone who's a great lover of rigor, I thought, well, okay, let's impose some rigor here. If you bring the boundaries of poetry, which inclines towards compression, absolute compression, to the short story, you create the maximum power of the short story within a minimum of space. And I gave it the name of Stoku, short story and haiku. Shall I share one with folks? Or did you want to ask another question?
No. You ready?
Yeah, sure. Well, this is a Stoku. I'm going to ask you to do a little thought experiment with me while I share this with you. Some of these tokus, I rewrote them so much. Some of them are 5-6 years rewriting them and boiling them down. So what I'd like you to do as a responsible member of the audience is to close your eyes if you want to. If you don't, just imagine, visualize what I'm about to read out to you. Either see yourself in it or see it. It's a thought experiment. What I'm going to read is a stoku called The Mysterious Anxiety of Them and Us. The mysterious anxiety of them and us. We were in the magnificent grounds of our mysterious host. A feast had been laid out in the open air. There were many of us present. Some were already seated, and some were standing behind those seated. In a way, there were too many of us for the food served, or it felt like that. There was a moment when it seemed that everyone would rush at the food, and we'd have to be barbaric and eat with our hands, fighting over the feast laid out on the lovely tables. The moment of tension lasted a long time. Our host did nothing and said nothing. No one was sure what to do. Insurrection brooded in the wind. Then something strange happened. Those who were at table served themselves and began eating. We ate calmly. My wife was sitting next to me. The food was wonderful. We ate with some awareness of those behind us who were not eating and who did not move. They merely watched us eating. Did we who were eating feel guilty? It was a complex feeling. There is no way of resolving it as such. Those who were at table ate. That's it. That's all. We ate a while. Then the people behind us began to murmur. One of them, in a low voice, said, "The first person who offers us some food will receive." I was tempted to offer them some food, but how could I? Where would I start? The situation was impossible. If you turned around, you would see them all. Then your situation would be polarized. It would be you and them. But it was never that way to begin with. We were all at the feast. It's just that you were at the table and you began to eat. They weren't at the table and they didn't eat. They did nothing. They didn't even come over, take a plate, and serve themselves. No one told them to just stand there watching us eat. They did it to themselves. So to turn around and offer them food would automatically be to see them and treat them as inferior, when in fact they behaved in a manner that made things turn out that way. And so we continued to eat and ignored the murmurs. Soon we had finished eating. We were satisfied and took up the invitation to explore other parts of the estate. There was still plenty of food left, as it happened. My wife and I were almost the last to leave the table. As we got up, I looked behind us. I was surprised to see only 3 people there. Was that all? They had seemed like more, like a crowd. Maybe there had been more of them, but they'd drifted off, given up, or died. While we had been eating, it had often occurred to me that there was nothing to stop them from sticking knives into our backs. My wife and I filed out with the others towards the gardens in the sumptuous grounds of that magnificent estate. It had been a dreamy day of rich sunlight. You can wake up now. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Shall we open it up for questions?
Yeah, I think so. Unless there's something else you want to say.
No. Did you
No, I think
talk more about Stoke?
I think we should be democratic.
We have time. We have time for questions. Does anyone in the audience want to ask Ben questions? Yes? Here? Yes?
I read The Famished Road many years ago and loved it. And I'm just wondering 2 things, actually. I remember it being extremely, extremely sad. I don't remember any details, but I remember it being extremely sad. And you seem very upbeat. And secondly, I'm wondering, do you still write mainly about Africa? And how do you keep in touch with Africa living in England, as I understand you do?
That was a 3-headed question, wasn't it? Okay. I had a third one. Maybe the sadness that you heard in The Famished Road was the sadness of your first reading. I think when you read it, you'll hear another note underneath it. Because there's something I'm a great believer in, which is I like the dialogue of opposites. So that something sad, something tragic is written about in an open tone. So it's a tragic subject and an open, almost bright, poetic tone. Or the other way, a happy subject written in a tragic tone. I've not done that as much as I'd like to. But so it is a sad subject, but the next time you read it, you hear the tone of voice of the narrator, which comes from one thing. The whole book comes from one thing, which is that he's a spirit child. And a spirit child is somebody who is a kid who, we call them abiku children, but I came up with this word spirit child. A spirit child is a child who goes, dies, and has come back. Yeah? And they know that he's come back. He's someone who's come back from it's almost like reincarnation. Right? So this child is at home with death. It's very important that you understand that. This child doesn't have a bad feeling about death. And if you remove a bad death feeling from your consciousness, there isn't anything tragic about life. Do you get what I mean? That's why it's an open tone. Because death is not a problem to him. He's been there. There isn't anything to be afraid of. He's tranquil with it. He's got death as part of a normal part of his consciousness. I speak of this spirit child as being half human, half dream. Did I miss out your second question, the second part of it? Keep in touch with Africa.
It's still your subject, and if you keep in touch with Africa by going back or by living mainly with other Africans in London, is Africa still your primary subject, and if so, how do you keep in touch with it?
Well, I don't know that an artist has a primary subject, really. This is a contentious issue. For me, it's been a long journey as a writer. And I've had to argue this many, many, many times. Because you're born in Ghana, is your subject Ghana? Just because you're born in the USA, is your subject the USA? Shakespeare was born in England. Did he really have to write only about England? No, he did not. He wrote about wherever he wanted to write about. But society kind of puts these prisons on us as we get older. They say, you're an American, you must write only about America, or only about Americans. And they slowly crush our consciousness and our possibilities. But the artist's subject is the whole of reality, the whole world and beyond, including the world of the imagination, including worlds that don't even exist. The artist should be, for us, on behalf of all of us, the freest kind of person. And so I kind of envy the young Ben Okri who, at the age of 14, wrote a novel set in China when he hadn't gone there. I'm still not able to do that. I'm still trying to fight out of the prisons that time has put on me. Thank you very much.
Down
Please.
here? It's a microphone.
Hello, thank you. And I have to say I haven't read any of your books yet, but after listening to you today, I definitely plan to. So, and I really appreciate your honesty and your creativity, and identify with a lot of what you said about literature, and even I think a lot about life can be learned from what you were saying about literature. And I thought it was interesting that when you were talking about Nigeria, or the part of Nigeria that you grew up in, as being a place where storytelling and mythologizing is a part of the culture. And I was just reflecting back on, that for us it actually is too, but just because we're learning it out of history books doesn't mean it's not storytelling and mythologizing, but we don't treat it that way. We pretend that it's fact because we call it history, but of course we're doing the same thing, it's just not as creative. So I was wondering, first of all, would you agree with that, or do you think that there's something different about storytelling and mythologizing when it is openly acknowledged as storytelling and mythologizing? Because it kind of seems to me that everybody does that. And the other one is...
Two-headed question.
No, I'll leave it at that.
No, I want to hear the second one. I don't have to answer, but let me hear it. I like questions.
No, I'm going to leave it there.
Okay. Yes, there is a difference, actually, if I'm really honest with you. And I've traveled extensively, and wherever I go, I ask the same question. How do you tell your kids stories? In England, they read to them. They buy books that someone has written, and they read. They say, John, now sit down. I'm going to read you a story. Once upon a time, there was a butterfly, and the butterfly's name was John, and that's what they do. They read to them, and the kids sit down there. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, when I was growing up, there wasn't that. Mm-hmm. Mom would say, if I'm a bad boy, Mom would say, Ben, do you know how the tortoise got that tough back? And I say, no, how did the tortoise get a tough back? I say, let me tell you how it got a tough back. This tortoise, like you today, didn't listen to anything they told him, and then he did this, and then he did that, and then that happened, and he fell from the sky, and he broke his back, and it all fell into pieces, and that's how I got a bad back. So the point I'm trying to make is that it comes from here. It comes from the mouth. It comes from the mouth into the ears, but it's not the mouth it comes from some store of mythical thinking. Yeah? Another thing, the impact that had on me was when I go back to the village when I was a kid, we used to sit around in the moonlight, and we used to invent this thing where we tell stories to one another. But the whole point of it was this. You had to make up a new story on the spot. Yeah? You mustn't quote stories that were there before. You had to make up. So this always kept you in touch with that stream of mythic tradition I'm talking about. But always, you must make it your own. That's the difference. Here we go to books first and then communicate with our kids. When I was growing up, it was an old man that you hadn't seen before. He was a story. A tree in bloom, that's a story. The river, there's a story behind the river. Often there are many stories. So that's what I mean when I say everything is imbued with stories. Now, there are other traditions that are poetic, where the same thing I'm talking about, it's poetry. Mm-hmm. But in our tradition, it's stories. Thank you very much. Thank you for your kind remarks earlier.
Yeah.
When you were talking about how each person has his or her own reality,
Yes.
this is something that happened to me, but I wanted to see if it's the same thing you're talking about.
Okay.
Right before Nelson Mandela came out of prison, my husband and I took in a young South African teenager so she would be safe. Her family was very unsafe. And when she came to live with us, of course I did not know what to expect. And we were standing in the kitchen one day, and she asked me where the witches were. And being a retired school teacher, I started going into the Salem witch trials and how in America we used to believe in witches and we didn't believe in witches anymore, and that was a primitive belief, blah, 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 because I was an asshole. And she said to me, "Oh, I see. There are no witches here." She said to me, "But there are witches in South Africa." Is that what you mean?
Yeah, partly, yes. It's different worldviews.
Because
I think if she lived here long enough, she would come around and say to you, actually, there are witches here.
Yeah, well now she's lived here almost 25 years, and I think she's changed. But through that experience, that was standing in my own kitchen. I thought, oh, it's completely different realities, and people here do not understand the role of the faith healer and all that. That's what you're talking about,
That's
I take
partly
it.
what I'm talking about, yeah. And it has tragic implications, actually, because if you come from a powerful culture, yeah, you assume the total validity of your worldview. You do. You say, this is the way the world is. There are no witches, no this, no that, and that's the way it is. Full stop. And someone else comes along and says, hang on a minute, there are witches. And you say, what's wrong with you? There are no witches. You slowly, because of your dominant, whatever it is, teach them out of their worldview. So in a sense, it starts to create a homogeneity. Yeah? Or if they resist it, you have antagonism. Most of the great conflicts of the world are conflicts of worldviews, really. And that's why tolerance depends on another quality, which is imagination. And imagination is that capacity to step outside your own worldview and into another. But you can only do that if you have respect for other worldviews and believe in other possible validities, which is what we don't have enough of in this world right now. Just to respect for other validities, rather than saying, hang on a minute, that's primitive. That doesn't exist. Do you get what I'm saying?
That's why that was a life-changing moment for me.
And I think for her too. I think it was
Would you like to read a poem? One last poem?
There's a lady that wanted to
Is there one more question?
Yeah.
Yeah.
One more question.
Sure.
Okay. So earlier in the talk, you said that you actually reject the brand of magical realism, and I cringed and I sort of shrank down in my seat when you said that, because just this morning I was like, oh, I'm going to see Ben Okri. He writes magical realism. I love him. Blah blah blah. So I'm curious to know. Does it matter if someone loves your work and calls it that? No, no, I'm serious. Like, I thought it was really interesting, your reasoning for why you did not want to be called that, and I'm definitely going to think about that and process that. But I do want to know, does it matter if people still appreciate the work and they call it that? And the second question is, I also thought it was really interesting how you framed what critics do, and obviously the role of critics, the importance of critics. So I also wanted to know if you do reviews and you critique things in the public sphere.
You did earlier in your career, right?
A two-headed question.
Yeah, again.
Does it matter? In a way, no, it doesn't. If you love the work and, you know, by whatever name you call it,
Yeah.
it's your reality. It doesn't really matter. But it does matter in another way. It matters in the way you read the work. How you read a work determines how you see a work, really, finally. And if you read a work under one rubric, you would really see through the lens of that rubric. Every reading like that is a color on your glasses. And what I want is for you to just remove those glasses and just see it. But you won't see it if you see it as magical realism, because then you will see that many of the things I'm doing, the spirit child seeing spirits and things like that, you would think it's just a device. You think it's just a literary device. Do you get what I'm saying? Or that it's a literary school. When in fact I'm saying this is someone's reality. This is how they see the world. And it's meant to, as it were, conflict with your perception of the world. It's a dialogue. Do you get what I'm saying? Every work of fiction is supposed to do that to us, to conflict us with a different worldview. But the most important thing is clarity of seeing. If there's one thing I tend to stress more than anything else, is to see clearly. It's the most difficult thing in the world. We think it's just because you open your eyes, you see. But most of our seeing is actually done through our thinking. It's done through our education. It's done through our prejudices. It's done through our fears. It's done through our use or lack of use of imagination. And actually how to peel away or clear the lenses of one's seeing so that you see something as clearly as possible as it is the most beautiful and the most difficult thing to do. And once you do that, everything is magnified by itself. Do you get what I'm saying? And that's what I really want to do. I just want to clean those glasses of all the lenses, of all the phrases and all the rubrics, till you just see the simple sentences there, and then you can have your own journey with it. Yeah? Was there a second head to that question?
Oh, yeah,
Criticism. Yes, I did earlier. Because it was a way of earning a living, partly. And also it was a way of exercising your relationship with your craft. I mean, there's nothing more wonderful for the creative mind than actually looking at another novel and seeing what you think about it, and whether it works for you or not, and to give good, clear, cogent reasons why this is so. But something happened to me and I stopped. And I tell you what happened very briefly. I read a book, and it pissed me off mightily. It really irritated me. And I gave it a really bad review. And what is worse?
Or,
we'll come to that.
okay.
And what is worse, because I have this principle that a review, a piece of writing, a piece of criticism should be as good a piece of writing as the book you are writing about, I took great pains to make this review as well written as possible. And it was published and I was pleased with myself.
Yeah.
10 years went past. And I reread the book. And I was ashamed of myself.
You regret it. Yeah.
I'd changed,
Yeah.
my mind had opened up, and I read it, and it was a different book. It was a really very good book. And I put down my critical pen after that. I just didn't do any more reviews. I didn't want to add to the quantity of literary injustice in this world.
Shall we end with a poem?
You like a poem?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
I think there's already one there. It's never clear to me what to end with. Should I make it a short poem or an upbeat poem? What do you guys want? Do you want something? You want something up?
Something magic.
What? Real magic. What do you want over there, my fellow hat fella? What do you want? Oh my goodness. Okay. You know what? I'm going to do, I like that sound. Oh, no, you'll have to buy me a drink for that. Okay, I tell you what, I'll read, was anybody there at the cabaret yesterday? Oh, 3 people were there, okay.
I'd love to hear it again.
Yeah? You wouldn't mind if I shared something I had yesterday? Okay. If you do mind, just do that. This is a New Year poem. It's the second piece of Twitter poetry that I did. The first one was a complete accident, and it turned out it was the first poem that was done as Twitter. This is the second. And it's a New Year poem, and it's called As Clouds Do Drift. You have to imagine 1 line a day, yeah? It's important you do that. As clouds do drift above our heads, as dreams do flit above our beds, so time sieves through our lives. Where does it go? And when it passes, what do we have to show? We can plant deeds in time, as gardeners plant roses or thyme. We can plant thoughts or good words too, especially if they are noble and true. Time is an act of consciousness, the source of fruitfulness. To master it, we are called. It's one of the greatest forces of the material world. We ought to use time like emperors of the mind. Do magic things that the future, surprised, will find. We could transform our lives today, seek out a higher way. The Buddha sat beneath a tree and then, from all illusions, became free. And as we travel this life that is a sea, we can have glimpses of eternity. We can join that growing fight to stop our world being plunged into night. We can wake to the power of our voice, change the world with the power of our choice. But there's nothing we can do if we do not begin to think anew. We're not much more than what we think. In our minds, we swim or we sink. If there's one secret I'd like to share, it's that we are what we dream or what we fear. So dream a good dream today and keep it growing in every way. Allow the moments of our life to help win the good fight or spread some light. The wise say that life's a dream, and soon the dream is done. But what you did in the dreaming is all that counts beneath the sun. The dream is real, and the real is a dream. Each one of us is a powerful being. Wake up to what you are. Something of the sun, something of a star. Wake up to what you can be. Search for a high destiny. While clouds do drift above our heads and dreams do flit above our beds. Bless you all and thank you very much.
Was that? There'll be a book signing outside, out front.
If they want it.
If you want it. And thank you again, Ben, and thank you for coming back to New York after so long.
Thank you very much, Andy.
It's a pleasure.
Wonderful.